will talk about the non-performance of the alternatives.
The first thing I want to point out is the frame in which I'm looking at this. Although I've given you a paper dealing with gesture usage, my discussion will go beyond that, or I think it'd be kind of dry. You think you're in a nonverbal panel. So I just give you that as a point of reference. This is one way that I looked at the debates much earlier, factoring the week they occurred. I put this paper together for a doctoral course. So, but I'll have comments that will go beyond that. In the 1996 election, Bill Clinton had a real simple situation. He was combating basically apathy among the electorate. He was dealing with some dissension among members of his own party. And at his lowest zenith as president, at the demise, in essence, of the Democratic majorities in the Congress and Senate in 1994, he picked up the phone and he called someone he called before. And I'm not talking about, his aunt. I'm talking about Dick Morris. In 1972, when Bill Clinton was governor of Arkansas, 1990,
78.
1990, when he was governor of Arkansas, and he ran for re-election and lost, mainly due to a road tax, an ill-advised road tax implemented in his mind to improve roads in Arkansas. He was defeated rather soundly at the ballot box. So in 1992, they have 2-year terms in Arkansas for governorship. He ran again, and he ran with the help of Dick Morris, generally viewed as a Republican operative. He had worked for many Republican candidates, including Jesse Helms. And Morris said, I knew that the phone would ring when the results came in. Whenever Bill Clinton has ever been in his lowest ebb, he has turned to Dick Morris. Some Democratic operatives argue that Dick Morris is Bill Clinton's dark side. But in this election, he was his strength because he successfully aligned Clinton with issues that allowed him to regain some of his credibility as president. He told him specifically in the book Behind the Oval Office, Morris's tome written after the unfortunate episode with the prostitute, that in essence, Bill, what you have to do to regain the mantle of leadership in Washington is to go incrementally. No big programs, no big fixes. People don't want that. They want small, meaningful, incremental steps in dealing with things like crime, drugs, balancing the budget, Family and Medical Leave Act, even health care reform needs to be done in small baby steps. And you need, as often as possible, to grab away issues like crime and taxes that are normally thought of as Republican issues, which, as we know, Clinton successfully did. Let's take a brief look at two brief vignettes from both the Hartford debate and the San Diego debate. One of the things that any incumbent has is the ability in the debate context, and of course these are not true debates. I coach debate, and these are not debates, okay? They are staged, rehearsed, canned presentations to the max. The only difference between the Hartford presentation and the San Diego presentation was the seating alignment and the source of the questions. In Hartford, the source of the questions was a sole moderator, Jim Lehrer. In San Diego, Jim Lehrer basically read the ground rules and then left it open to a random drawing of average citizens who were seated in a bleacher type arrangement. One I was not particularly fond of and thought certainly made for some really awkward camera angles. Several times you got Bob Dole's rear end in the way of Bill Clinton while he was speaking and vice versa. And you got some really bizarre behavior by the audience, understandably, made them nervous. Average folks who'd not been on national TV before, asking, in some cases, some pretty goofy questions, or asking good questions, but asking them in a goofy manner. So let me show you first a little snippet of the Hartford debate, which was pretty much the traditional 2-minute and 2 podiums format that we've grown accustomed to. The second format, the San Diego format, was one that Clinton requested, insisted, the town hall format, and is one that he has proven over the course of his political career that he's very adept at, he's very comfortable in, and he likes it. And even after he was elected,
I think I already put your tape in, but all you have to do is hit play.
Okay. I think I did not handle that. So we'll just watch a little of the opening.
Better check.
No, I don't know. Yeah.
Absolutely not. Let's look at the position. First of all, remember that in this campaign season, since Senator Dole's been a candidate, he has bragged about the fact that he voted against Medicare in the beginning, in 1965, one of only 12 members. He said he did the right thing then. He knew it wouldn't work at the time. That's what he said. In his budget that he passed along with Speaker Gingrich, cut Medicare $270 billion, more than was necessary to repair the Medicare Trust Fund. It would have charged seniors more for out-of-pocket costs as well as more in premiums because doctors could have charged them more. The American Medical Hospital Association, the Nurses Association, the Catholic Hospital Association all said hundreds of hospitals could close and people would be hurt badly under the Dole-Gingrich Medicare plan that I vetoed. And now with this risky $550 billion tax scheme with Senator Dole, even his own friends, his campaign co-chair, Senator D'Amato, says that they can't possibly pay for it without cutting Medicare more and cutting Social Security as well, according to him. Now, my balanced budget plan adds 10 years to the life of the Medicare Trust Fund. 10 years. And we'll have time to deal with the long-term problems of the baby boomers. But it was simply wrong to finance their last scheme to cut Medicare $270 billion to run the risk of it withering on the vine. We always have to reform it over the years, but we need someone who believes in it to reform it.
Senator Dole? Well, I must say, I look back to vote on Medicare in 1965. We had a program called Elder Care that also provided drugs and was means tests to people who needed medical attention received it. I thought it was a good program. But I've supported Medicare ever since. In fact, I used to go home, my mother would tell me that all I've got is my Social Security and my Medicare. Don't cut it. I wouldn't violate anything my mother said. In fact, we had a conversation about our mothers one day, a very poignant conversation in the White House. I'm concerned about health care. I've had the best health care in government hospitals, Army hospitals, and I know it's important, but we've got to fix it. It's his trustee, the president's trustee, not mine, who say it's going to go broke. He doesn't fix it for 10 years. We ought to appoint a commission just as we did in Social Security in 1983 when we rescued Social Security, and I was proud to be on that commission, along with Claude Pepper, the champion of senior citizens from Florida. And we can do it again if we take politics out of it. Stop scaring the seniors, Mr. President. You've already spent $45 million scaring seniors and tearing me apart. I think it's time to have a truce.
All right. What you're basically seeing there is Bill Clinton's best weapon, Bob Dole. We have Clinton citing statistic after statistic, litany of study after study, and we have Bob Dole anecdotally reporting that his mother told him it would be a good idea to preserve social welfare programs. The other weapon that he had was Dole's constant shifts on issues. Bob Dole had the issue of the week. First it was the 15% tax cut. Then it was a commission to fix Medicare and fix Social Security shortfalls on into the year 2010. A lot of the fault doesn't necessarily lie with Bob Dole. It certainly lies, though, with his flanks of handlers who did a miserable job in coordinating the candidate and keeping him on message. In terms of Clinton's performance, it is not his best performance. It clearly pales in contrast to 1992 when he was a relatively fresh face and didn't have a record to defend. But it's good enough to win an election, particularly against a contrast, old versus young, someone who's clearly a member of the system but resigns his Senate seat to become, quote, an ordinary citizen and thus loses any credibility he did have, certainly any connection he had to his party, and makes tremendous flip-flops on issues. Bob Dole, by most accounts, is one of the most pro-welfare Republican senators, one of the most pro-Social Security senators. But for the purposes of running in 1996, he literally had to shift 20 years of his public record to set up a plan that would parallel it with the Republican platform. In terms of style and delivery and presentation, the issues that Clinton successfully flip-flopped on and became a Republican on, of course, were crime. He was able to cite incremental baby steps, just as Morris had suggested, the signing of the Brady Bill, the signing of a crime bill, which at least in theory sounds good, brings 100,000 new cops onto the streets. All it really does is provide match funding to train cops. It doesn't guarantee they'll ever go through the training, whether there'll be enough, but it sounds nice. Secondly, you had welfare reform. Right before the election, Trent Lott and Clinton got together and factioned a rough-hued truce, and Clinton signed a very flawed welfare bill. He promised Democrats, I'll fix it after the election. Re-elect me. That's a reason. Jesse Jackson, in his address to the convention, said, we've got to re-elect Bill Clinton so he'll fix the flawed welfare reform package, which, you know, it's kind of like after he set a fire, we're going to reelect him so he can put the fire out. You know, it's like asking a pyromaniac to deal with a problem he's caused. A third problem, of course, is protecting Social Security and Medicare. The Democrats, even back to the 1994 election, used them as a club against the Republicans to make them appear less compassionate, to make them appear less concerned, particularly about senior citizens and particularly about the elderly and the disabled, and did a successful job. It took a while for the message to take. By the time 96 rolled around, most people believed that, in fact, the contract for America was not a contract for America, it was a contract on America, or at least upon America's senior citizens and young people. That, when I say young people, families who were basically need Social Security when a parent or family member dies. Finally, the notion of families. In both conventions, and certainly in Clinton's campaign, he promoted the notion that I am the family president. And unfortunately, because of his age, and partly because of just not being in the same generation, certainly being separated almost by 3 generations from Clinton, and not having young children to play him out, Chelsea played a much larger role in this campaign, as did Hillary, albeit they taped Hillary's mouth shut, metaphorically speaking, in contrast to 92. And they trumpeted them as a family, and people who know what it's like to be parents, and people who know what it's like to deal with current issues, such as how do you tell your children not to use drugs when you've used them yourself. In terms of style, one of the other things you'll see, of course, is Bill Clinton. The old adage is that there's Bill Clinton in terms of political grandstanding and campaigning. There's no better campaigner. There's Bill Clinton and everybody else. And that's certainly true. Bill Clinton is an excellent communicator. He's very dynamic. His use of gestures, his use of movement, his use of facial expressions, his use of vocal variety are excellent. The problem is people don't believe him. I mean, he certainly looks good if we're looking at a public speaking presentation, but people don't trust him. There's an ardor that somehow he's just a little too fluent, just a little too glib, and thus the moniker Slick Willie. The other thing that came into play, of course, was that they were able to control the number of debates. Dole would have been happy to have debated every day, for 2 weeks preceding the election. His numbers were so bad in the polls. But Clinton limited it to 2 debates. And there were arguments apparently among the staff, if you read Morris's book, that in fact Clinton wanted more debates because he just loves to talk. And they said, no, Bill, 2 is enough, and we're not even sure that isn't 1 too many, particularly since really all they wanted was the town hall forum. They did not even want the Hartford debate, at least in its format, to occur. Finally, let's look at that San Diego debate, at least just a brief clip, and I'll show you some of the problems with the format. Even though Clinton likes it, I personally don't care for it, and I think it's rather awkward. I think it's nice to get people involved in the political process, but surely they could do a better job in terms of screening the questions that are asked, or at least the way they're asked. And this is a pretty good example. If it's queued up to the correct place, you get a little taste of that.
Senator Dole. Thank you very much, Jim.
I'm going to fast
Let me
forward.
first give you a sports up.
I'm going to fast forward this to the first question. These are their opening statements, but I mean, we've heard their opening statements. They're pretty much the same in each instance. But the first question, to set it up, is from a young lady who's a school teacher, and it is a classic. And probably how not to ask a question, and in due course how not to respond to it, really, particularly on Dole's part, but really also on Clinton's. They pretty much ignore her question and say what they want to say. Another thing is, you'll notice that Clinton tried to look as old as he could. He constantly had his hair re-dyed and dyed again on the campaign trail. It's almost humorous to look at pictures of him in 92 where actually it's brown and then gray highlights. Why? Because he wanted to look mature, but he certainly didn't want to look aged. He didn't want to look out of date. And so a lot of work with the hair.
Hello, Senator Dole. My name is Shannon McAfee. I'm a beginning educator in this country, and I really think it's important what children have to say. They're still very idealistic, and everything they say comes from the heart. I have a quote for you from If I Were President, compiled by Peggy Gavin. A 6th grader says, if I were president, I would think about Abraham Lincoln and George Washington and what they did to make our country great. We should unite the white and black people and people of all cultures. Democrats and Republicans should unite also. We should all come together and think of the best ways to solve the economic problems of our country. I believe that when we are able to come together and stop fighting amongst ourselves, we will get along a lot better. These are the ideals and morals that we are trying to teach our children in these days. Yet we don't seem to be practicing them in our government in anything. If you are president, how will you begin to practice what we are preaching to our children? The future of our nation.
Well, I would say, first of all, I think, very good question. I appreciate the quote from the young man. There's no doubt about it that many American people have lost their faith in government. They see scandals almost on a daily basis. They see ethical problems in the White House today. They see 900 FBI files, private person being gathered up by somebody in the White House. Nobody knows who hired this man. So there's a great deal of cynicism out there. But I've always tried, whatever I've done, is bring people together. I said in my acceptance speech in San Diego about 2 months ago that the exits are clearly marked. If you think the Republican Party is some place for you to come, if you're narrow-minded or bigoted or don't like certain people in America, the exits are clearly marked for you to walk out of, as I stand here without compromise, because this is the party of Lincoln. I think we have a real obligation. Obviously, public officials. I'm no longer a public official. I left public life on June 11th of this year. But it is very important. Young people are looking to us. They're just looking to us for leadership. They're watching what we do, what we say, what we promise, and what we finally deliver. And I would think, it seems to me that there are opportunities here. When I'm President of the United States, I will keep my word. My word is my bond. Mr. President.
One of the reasons that I ran for president, Sandy, is because not just children, a lot of grown-ups felt that way. If you remember, 4 years ago we had not only rising unemployment, but a lot of rising cynicism. I never worked in Washington as an elected official. It seemed to me that most of the arguments were partisan, Republican, Democrat, left, right, liberal, conservative. That's why I said tonight I'm for opportunity, responsibility, and community. And we've gotten some real progress in the last 4 years. I've also done everything I could at every moment of division in this country, after Oklahoma City, when these churches were burned, to bring people together and remind people that we are stronger because of our diversity. We have to respect one another. You mentioned Washington and Lincoln. They were presidents of historic times. This is an historic time. It's important that we go beyond those old partisan arguments and focus on people and their future. When we do that, instead of shutting the government down over a partisan fight on the budget, we're a better country, and that's why we're making progress now.
Senator.
Okay. The last things I'll say are that, of course, dating back to 1990, I believe it was January of 96, actually late 95, the Republican majority led by Gingrich, Army, and that group shut the government down several times. And this was probably, Gingrich recounts now in a Washington Post weekly interview recorded last week, where he's trying to retool his image to become a kinder and gentler nude. I don't know if that's possible. Ask people in this state if it's possible. And reaching out to Democrats. But he admits the closure of the government, the shutdowns were a tragic mistake, and they really allowed Clinton to regain his stature as a leader and to be able to say, I do matter, because you recall the very first press conference after the 94 defeat was, I do matter. Clinton came out and told the media, I'm still president, I matter, which is rather a startling statement for a president to make, but he did. But this allowed him to say, see, I do matter. I can veto bills, I can embarrass the Republicans, I can set an agenda. Again, an agenda that Dick Morris had a great deal to do with. In terms of delivery and style, even if the content doesn't directly answer the young lady's question, even if the question isn't quite clear by the time they get to it, clearly, in terms of just speaking style, Clinton is a clear, more articulate spokesperson for his position. And like Dole, he attempts to use each response, whether it's a direct response to the question, to remind people of some negative image associated with the other party. Dole, of course, used the scandals, the beginning scandals that were beginning to come out about FBI files and so forth. And, of course, Clinton reminds us about the government shutdowns and the disunity between the parties. And that you need him, because if you elect a Republican president, then you have no one to stop anything that the other party might do. You have no checks and balances. So overall, there's absolutely no doubt that Bill Clinton probably did not perform as well in 1996 as he did in 1992, but he certainly challenged more because he had a record to defend. But on the other hand, when the rankings of presidents are evaluated not in terms of quality of decision-making, quality of improvements of life, Clinton would at least go down as a very articulate spokesperson, much like Ronald Reagan. But on the other hand, we'll have to look more substantively in terms of evaluating his history as president to what did he really do. And it's these incremental steps that Dick Morris has admonished that work very well to get you reelected to office, but they may not allow you to have a lasting, positive place in history when your time is done. That's what I have to say.
Good, thanks. Okay, Jim Reppert from Southern Arkansas University talking about the performance of Bob Dole.
And the title of my presentation is not the same as what you see in your handouts. It actually is called Critiquing the 1996 Presidential Debate Performances of Bob Dole, Lowered Expectations for the Rhetorically Challenged. But I think under the circumstances, and I'll get to this later on in totality during my edited video clips, I really feel that given his limitations as a public speaker, the way he goes about his everyday business as a rhetor, usually in the Senate for the past 30 years, I really feel he made pretty much the best of his abilities, and I'll get to that in a couple of minutes. But what I'd like to do first of all is to turn the clock back to 1976. You'll recall that he was the vice presidential candidate for President Gerald Ford, and the vice presidential debate, which was taking place in Houston between then Senator Mondale and then Senator Dole. We didn't know what the expectations were going to be for the debate, but Mondale was prepared. He was told in advance that there was a possibility that during the course of that debate, a question would come up about Democrat wars. And that's something that was an albatross around Dole's neck for a long time. And I think you could make a very clear case that when the 1996 presidential debates came around, he was not going to make that same mistake again. Dole is a very humorous man. He's a very caring man. Unfortunately, the way he carries himself in his public affairs, rather flat, rather monotonic. For instance, if Gary and I are conducting a presidential debate, what you'll notice on the videotape is oftentimes when he's trying to make an attack on Clinton, he does not look at him. And I think especially in the San Diego debate, when you watch the video clips, it would have been much more effective for Dole had he actually looked in Clinton's face so that negative attack could have been reinforced. Instead, as Bob mentioned, he looks out towards the bleacher area, which was not as effective. I disagree in the respect that I like the way the format was set up. Now, I teach broadcast journalism, and I like the idea of the angles and the overall look of the presentation, which, of course, is why the Clinton debate camp had it set up in that fashion. I also think Clinton did a reasonably decent job. I think we have to remember going into these debates that he felt that there was going to be an all-out attack upon his character, his integrity, his morality. So as a result, his debate coach, George Mitchell, the former Senate Majority Leader from Maine, I think really deserves a great deal of credit for hammering Clinton during the practice debate sessions. So when Clinton got into the actual debate, he was very cool, he was calm and collected. But I think I also want to, in addition to taking the clock back to 1976, now go up to the 1992 presidential primaries, because what we have is a situation where Dole's performance in the presidential primaries against Lamar Alexander, Mr. Excitement Steve Forbes, Lamar, where's my plaid shirt, Alexander, I think his performance in most of those debates was rather lackluster, and I don't think they stood up to, let's say, the performance of George Bush in the 1988 presidential primaries, where he went after more of the red meat idea with Roger Ailes, the Fox Media Meister now in news, as his debate coach. So Lamar Alexander says during one of the 1992 presidential debates on the GOP side, he says, look, when you get into a debate with Bill Clinton, if you become the presidential nominee, you're going to have your lunch handed to you. There is no way that you're going to be able to really do as well as you can against Bill Clinton. And I think that's something that the Dole people were really worried about. Again, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, here's a man who is very humorous, And ideally, during the first presidential debate, it would be good for him to show his humor. And what I tried to do with some of these representative clips is to show examples where Dole is humorous. So for many individuals in the voting public, 35% of whom theoretically had not made a decision on a candidate when the debates were taking place, they might think, well, hey, he's really a nice guy. Maybe this is somebody we could consider. On the other hand, people might say Bob Dole's a great American, but your shot was really in 1988. You blew it in the New Hampshire primary. We're going to stick with Clinton. Now, one of the things you're going to see during the context of my presentation is a graphic from CNN's Inside Politics, which shows that Clinton won both debates according to a stratified random sample of people who were watching by margins of roughly about 30%. But even then, is it fair to judge Dole against Clinton, who is an outstanding debater? One could argue that Dole is a caring, thoughtful, decent man who doesn't necessarily bring forth all of those values to the surface in a very effusive, ebullient, extemporaneous manner, where Clinton, who according to some people who have worked with him can be rather cold and standoffish and quick to temper, comes across as feeling your pain. The question that you saw Bob show during the San Diego debate also is on my videotape, but I'm going to play it in its entirety for this purpose. I'd like you to watch it from a little bit of a different perspective. Take a look at the camera angles, the way Clinton zones in on the person he's talking to. Dole doesn't always do that. He feels uncomfortable with that natural give and take. And I think part of it is because of the way in which he gave his speeches in the Senate. If I was personally critiquing his performance, I would say, on balance, I would give him slightly higher points for the San Diego Town Hall Forum than the staged press conference in Hartford. Because when you take a look at those desks, it's very similar to the setup in the Senate. And I think he felt very comfortable doing that. But again, the idea of ideally looking at Clinton and saying, when you have a moral problem, that's a problem that the country has. Look right at him and make the case. Clinton's very smart. He doesn't have to be goaded into making a negative response. So what does he do in these cases? Blows off the question. Even when in the first debate in Hartford we have allegations of scandal come up, what does he do? He blows it off. So what I've done is to prepare a videotape which runs roughly a little over 20 minutes in its entirety, which has voiceovers for me on it. Like I said, I teach broadcast journalism at Southern Arkansas University, and I've got, in chronological order, sequences from the first debate and the second debate, roughly about 3 short questions and answers from each. In addition, what I have is trying to put together the right spin on the debate from individuals like James Carville, who works for Clinton, Mike Murphy, who had been working for Senator Dole, Chris Dodd, who was the co-chairman of the Democratic Party during the 1996 campaign. And he says, similar to what Bob said, the Dole campaign doesn't have a clue. First, it's the 15% tax cut. Then they want debates every week. Then it's Jack Kemp. He's going to save the ticket. What are they going to do? And in addition to that, what we have is, after the debates, not only the particular spin, but most importantly, how the media is playing the debates. And I think what often happens in the debates, and it's rather nauseating, the first time I talked about this in toto was at the 1994 SSCA convention in Norfolk, when we talked about the 1992 presidential debates and the spin put on them by individuals working for the candidates, including Perot. But in this particular case, I think what you'll notice from the people who are spinning, and also from the people who are reporting the news, is that a perception is going out that Clinton obviously is winning, that Dole may be doing his best, but maybe there are certain things he can do in the second debate to really go after Dole, or to really go after Clinton. And I don't think it necessarily works. In fact, I think it could be legitimately argued that whenever Mitchell is preparing Dole for that, when Mitchell is preparing Clinton for that second debate, he probably went out of his way to make sure that Clinton got his anger out of his system. As far as the end of the videotape is concerned, I make some comments possibly pertaining to the 2000 election and what may be taking place there. But other than that, I really think that Dole probably did about as well as he could. If I was grading Dole on an A, B, C, D, F basis, overall I'd probably give him, on the quality of how well he can perform, anywhere from maybe a B- to a C+, and maybe give Clinton somewhere in the mid B range. If you want to use the boxing analogy on a 10-point must system, maybe 10-9 in favor of Clinton. I hate the idea that the media brings about of the wins and losses, as I mentioned a minute ago, and you're going to see some of that. Was that knockout punch thrown? Was there something that we could have done to change? I think in one of the clips that I did not use for part of my video, Al Hunt, who is a reporter for the Wall Street Journal, makes a very salient point, and it's this. He says, most people are not going to change their minds based on a debate. They're just not going to. In fact, if you go back to the 1988 vice presidential debate, between probably the clearest example of a knockout between Lloyd Bentsen and Dan Quayle, Susan Estrich, who was running that campaign, said, look, we were on cloud 9 after the debate, but you know how many points we got in the polls? 1. And even that had been erased by the next debate between Dukakis and Bush. So, with that being said, I'd like to show you the videotape. Again, roughly just over 3 questions and answers from each of the debates, including, in chronological order, spin and media coverage. Did you take the tape out, Bob?
Yes, I did.
Did you approve of the Nixon pardon when President Ford granted it? Do you approve of it now? And if the issue was fair game in your 1974 campaign in Kansas, why is it not an appropriate topic now?
Well, it is an appropriate topic, I guess, but it's not a very good issue any more than the war in Vietnam would be, or World War II, or World War I, or the war in Korea. All Democrat wars, all in this country. I figured up the other day, if we added up the killed and wounded in Democrat wars in this country, it'd be about 1.6 million Americans, and that's to fill the city of Detroit. Now, if we want to go back and rake that over and over and over, we can do that. I assume Senator Mondale doesn't want to do that. But it seems to me that the pardon of Richard Nixon is behind us. Watergate's behind us. If we have this vision for America, if we're really concerned about those people out there and their problems, yes, in their education and their jobs, we ought to be talking about that. I know it strikes a responsive chord for some to kick Richard Nixon around. I don't know how long you can keep that up. How much mileage is there in someone who's been kicked, whose wife suffered a serious stroke, who's been disgraced in office and stepped down from that office? I think after 2 years and some months, it is probably a dead issue. But let them play that game. That's the only game they know.
Senator Mondale.
I think Senator Dole has richly earned his reputation as a hatchet man tonight.
Bob Dole was criticized for his lack of rhetorical ability during the 1996 GOP primaries. Lamar Alexander wondered out loud if Dole could match verbal skills on the same stage with President Bill Clinton. This program shall examine questions and answers from the 2 1996 presidential debates. Dole would positively critique his own abilities, but were expectations lowered enough? Could GOP spinmeisters overcome polling data indicating Dole was a big loser? Should the media play up presidential debates in sports rhetoric, wins, losses, knockout punch? What follows is a video verite perspective of Dole and Clinton, including analyses from those debates.
Well, because the reason I say you should think twice before attacking the president is that they've attacked his presidency with the most malicious, mean-spirited, hateful, vulgar attacks that any politician in modern times has gone through, and he has a 17-point lead. It looks like the message is that these attacks are not working, that the American public sees the president, they see a guy that can take a punch, that can keep smiling and keep focused, and it plays right into sort of the whole Dole, Jesse Helms, Pat Robinson, Rush Limbaugh, and Newt Gingrich Republican Party, that all it is hateful and mean-spirited, and all they want to do is tear everything down. They don't stand for anything. They don't have any sense of optimism, any sense of hope. They just rip everybody up, and that's fine. If he wants to do that, tell him to go ahead. But I think he ought to be a deal in hope. I think he ought to be like Eisenhower and Reagan as opposed to Gingrich and that whole silly crowd we got up there right now. Mike Murphy, are you going to take that?
No, that was a pretty good haymaker from James. The fact is, the great opportunity for Senator Dole here is in this debate, he gets Clinton out from the fortress-like Clinton campaign and right in front where they can have some differences and 100 million people get to stay involved. Clinton's been spending about 95% of his advertising money on negative ads. Well, all that bar's going to get stripped away, and people are going to take a real look at Clinton and a real look at Dole. The expectations are all Clinton. I mean, the great performance art president. He'll feel pain. He'll maybe do some magic tricks. But if Dole can get it one-on-one and have people focus on both guys, it's a real opportunity for him, and I think he'll do pretty well.
The President said in his opening statement, we are better off today than we were 4 years ago. Do you agree?
Well, he's better off than he was 4 years ago.
I agree with that. That's right.
And I may be better off 4 years from now, but I don't know. I look at the slowest growth in the century. He inherited a growth of 4.7 to 4.8%. Now it's down to about 2.4%. We're going to pass 1 million bankruptcies this year for the first time in history. We've got stagnant wages. In fact, women's wages have dropped 2.2%. Men's wages haven't gone up, gone down. So we have stagnation. We have the highest foreign debt in history. And it seems to me that if you take a look, are you better off? Well, I guess some may be better off. Saddam Hussein is probably better off than he was 4 years ago. Rene Preval is probably better off than he was 4 years ago. But are the American people? They're working harder and higher and harder and paying more taxes. For the first time in history, you pay about 40% of what you earn, more than you spend for food, clothing, and shelter combined, for taxes under this administration. So some may be better off. They talk about family income being up. That's not true in Connecticut. Family income is down. And it's up in some cases because both parents are working. One works for the family, and one works to pay taxes for the government. We're going to give them a tax cut so they spend more time with their children, maybe even take a vacation. That's what America's all about.
Well, let me say, first of all, in February, Senator Dole acknowledged that the American economy was in the best shape it's been in 30 years. We have 10.5 million more jobs, a faster job growth rate than under any Republican administration since the 1920s. Wages are going up for the first time in a decade. We have record numbers of new small businesses. We had the biggest drop in the number of people in poverty in 27 years. All groups of people are growing. We had the biggest drop in income inequality in 27 years in 1995. The average family's income has gone up over $1,600 just since our economic plan passed. So I think it's clear that we're better off than we were 4 years ago. Now we need to focus on what do we need to do to be better off still. How can we help people as we are to get their retirement when they work for small businesses, to be able to afford health insurance, to be able to educate their children. That's what I want to focus on. But we're clearly better off than we were 4 years ago, as Senator Dole acknowledged this year.
But it seems to me the record is clear. The record is pretty clear in Arkansas. When your governor, drug use doubled. You resisted the appointment of a drug czar there because you thought it might interfere with treatment. But here you cut the drug czar's office 83%. You cut interdiction substantially. I mean, that's what I want to stop it from coming across the border. And in my administration, we're going to train the National Guard to stop it from coming across the border. This is an invasion of drugs from all over the world. And we have a responsibility. You had a surgeon, or before General McCaffrey, you had a lady who said we ought to consider legalizing drugs. Is that the kind of leadership we need? And I won't comment on other things that have happened in your administration or your past about drugs. But it seems to me the kids ought to, if they started, they ought to stop and just don't do it.
Mr. President? Well, let me say again, we did have a drug czar in Arkansas, but he answered to the governor just like this one answers to the president. That's what I thought we ought to do. Secondly, Senator Dole, you voted against the crime bill that had the death penalty for drug kingpins in it, and you voted to cut services to 23 million school children under the Safe and Drug-Free Schools Act. I don't think that means you're soft on drugs. We just have a different approach. But let me remind you that my family has suffered from drug abuse. I know what it's like to see somebody you love nearly lose their lives, and I hate drugs, Senator. we need to do this together, and we can.
Senator Dole, we talked mostly now about differences between the two of you that relate to policy issues and that sort of thing. Are there also significant differences in the more personal area that are relevant to this election?
Let me say first on the President's promise for another tax cut. I mean, I've told people as I travel, all you got the tax cut he promised last time, vote for him in '96. And not many hands go up. So the question was, do I use election promise from my opponent? The people want economic reform. They're having a hard time making ends meet. You got one parent working for the government, the other parent working for the family. And this is important business. This is about getting the economy moving again. This is about American jobs and opportunities. It's about the government, as I said before, pinching its pennies for a change instead of the poor taxpayer. When they raise your taxes, nobody runs around asking people, where are you going to get the extra money? I think the government can do better. Are there personal differences?
That are relevant to this.
Well, my blood pressure is lower and my weight, my cholesterol, but I will not make health an issue in this campaign.
Now, the reason he comes on that primarily is because there was a story which came out after the election in Newsweek
I think
Time,
there's personal
which
differences.
stated that he had had an affair before
I don't
he
like to
got
get into
divorced from his
personal
first wife.
matters. As far as I'm concerned, this is a campaign about issues. It's about my vision for America and about his liberal vision for America, and not about personal things. And I think his liberal vision is a thing of the past. I know he wants to disown it. I wouldn't want to be a liberal either, Mr. President. You're stuck with it because that's your record. It's your record in Arkansas, the biggest tax increase in history, biggest crime increase in history, biggest drug increase in history in Arkansas.
Mr. President?
Well, just for the record, when I was a governor, we had the lowest, second lowest tax burden of any state in the country, the highest job growth rate of any state when I ran for president, and we're widely recognized for a lot of other advances. But the important thing is, what are we going to do now?
But as a President of the United States, when somebody asks you about pardons, you say no comment, period. And I think he made a mistake. And I think when you make a mistake, you say, I made a mistake. But apparently his position hasn't changed. So if there are other specific areas, but beyond that, I haven't gotten into any of these things, as the President knows. We've had that discussion. And I know Senator Motto, I think, may have had a hearing or two on Whitewater, I can't remember. But he's not my general chairman, he's a friend of mine. And so is Senator Kennedy, a friend of yours. And I remember one day on the floor, I said, now, gentlemen, let me tax your memories. And Kennedy jumped up and said, why haven't we thought of that before? You know, one of your liberal friends.
Thank you.
Mr. President, 30 seconds.
No comment.
First it was leaving the Senate, then it was picking Jack Kemp, then it was a tax cut idea. There's always some sort of surprise gimmick. He's reinvented the flat tire in this
Because you'll
campaign.
see
Every
it
time he
where
tries
he
to
goes
breathe air
out
into
his way
something,
of
he gets
saying,
into
if
trouble
anybody
again.
acts up, I am going to point you out and I am going to make sure that you are ridiculed. And it was very clear that he was not going to have any kind of chicanery among people in the audience for that second debate. And like I said, in a moment you'll see just a little bit of layers setting up here. It'll be coming up here.
No, I never believed that.
First debate
He wasn't about to
analysis.
make the mistake he made 20 years ago.
I guess not, but let me ask you this then. It seemed to me, watching the debate, that this was very, very heavily issues-oriented more than anything else. Do you think maybe that turned people off, or do you think that this is a type of election which issues really don't matter anymore and it has to do with the two men? You said no. Let me start with you, Ms. Leatherstone.
Well, there's a difference between issues and details. I think voters do want to hear about issues. They do want to hear about vision, about direction, about theme, and to some extent about plans to solve problems. But I do glaze over when you start hearing statistics and ups and downs and percentages, and I think that may have been a part of the problem at times. The debate really did border on the policy wonkish.
I suppose it did. Well, then what can we expect coming up in the next debate, do you think? Let me stay with you, Ms. Leatherstone.
in the next presidential debate?
Right.
Or let's face it, we didn't see a debate tonight, and we're certainly not going to see a debate in the next presidential debate. It's going to be a town hall forum. It is Bill Clinton's métier.
Right.
And I think that Bob Dole had to come a little bit farther than he did tonight to catch up to the president in a town hall forum.
We did not have a former president of the United States in the audience.
Setting the stage.
Mr. President, I hereby designate you hall monitor. You have my permission, sir, to whack anybody who gets out of line. Now, what this means practically is that in a few minutes, Mrs. Clinton and Mrs. Dole are going to come in. They're going to sit back up there. Feel free to applaud when that happens. I'll tell you when that's going to happen. And then a few minutes after that, their husbands are going to come in. And I will introduce them. Feel free to applaud. And then they will take their positions here at the podium. And then I will count you all. You can, feel free to talk to your neighbor for a while. And then I'll start counting you down to silence. Okay, 6 o'clock, straight up, is when we go silent. The networks then go on the air. And then about a minute, 15 seconds after that, I say good evening. The two candidates will make 2-minute opening statements, and then we'll go to the first question from the folks on the stage, and then we will do that until there are about 5 minutes left, and then the two candidates will make closing statements. Okay? Have I got a deal? Thank you very much.
These are the ideals and morals that you...
Now, in this particular case, like I said, when you watch it, pay attention to how many different camera angles the director is using during the response, trying to foster that interpersonal reaction between Dole and the respondent and Clinton and the individual asking the question.
To our children, the future of our nation.
Well, I would say, first of all, I think...
Looking down to the side, not exactly Mr. Extemporaneous.
There's no doubt about it that many American people have lost their faith in government. They see scandals almost on a daily basis. They see ethical problems. Whatever I've done is bring people together. I said in my acceptance speech in San Diego about 2 months ago that the exits are clearly marked. If you think the Republican Party is someplace for you to come, if you're narrow-minded or bigoted or don't like certain people in America, the exits are clearly marked for you to walk out of, as I stand here without compromise, because this is the party of Lincoln. I think we have a real obligation. Obviously, public officials, I'm no longer a public official. I left public life on June the 11th of this year. But it is very important. Young people are looking to us. They're looking to us for leadership. They're watching what we do, what we say, what we promise, and what we finally deliver. And I would think, seems to me that there are opportunities here.
Will not look
when I'm President of the United States, I will keep my word. My word is my bond.
Mr. President, one of the reasons that I ran for president, Sandy, is because not just children, a lot of grown-ups felt that way. And if you remember,
Notice the difference in positioning. Dole wanders around like he's waiting for a bus. Clinton zones in on her and stays there because he knows that camera provides a very flattering angle from the background.
It seemed to me that most of the arguments were partisan, Republican, Democrat, left, right, liberal, conservative. That's why I said tonight I'm for opportunity, responsibility, and community. And we've gotten some real progress in the last 4 years. I've also done everything I could at every moment of division in this country after Oklahoma City, when these churches were burned, to bring people together and remind people that we are stronger because of our diversity. We have to respect one another. You mentioned Washington and Lincoln. They were presidents of historic times. This is an historic time. It's important that we go beyond those old partisan arguments and focus on people and their future. When we do that, instead of shutting the government down over a partisan fight on the budget, we're a better country, and that's why we're making progress now.
Honor, duty, and country. That's what America's all about. Certainly the President of the United States. The highest office in the world, the most important office in the world, has a responsibility to young people. we talked about earlier, to everyone, by example. And when it comes to public ethics, he has a responsibility.
Turn around, look at him,
And you have 30-some in your administration who either left or being investigated or in jail or whatever, then you've got an ethics problem. It's public ethics. I'm not talking about private, we're talking about public ethics. And you have 900 files gathered up by some guy who was a bouncer in a bar and hired a security officer to collect files in Watergate. I know a person went to jail for looking at one file, one FBI file. There are 900 sequestered in the White House. 900. People like you. Why should they be rifling through your files? So the President has a great responsibility. That's one that I understand and certainly carry out.
This is the most religious great country in history. And yet, interestingly enough, we have the most religious freedom of any country in the world, including the freedom not to believe. And now we have all these people. Just up the road in Los Angeles County, we've got people from 150 different racial and ethnic groups, and they've got tons of different religions. But the fundamental tenets of virtually every religion are the same. And what I try to do is to support policies that would respect religion and then help parents inculcate those values to their children.
All right, now we go to the closing statements. Senator Dole, your first 2 minutes, sir.
Well, let me thank everybody here at the university, and Jim, thank you. All the people who may still be watching, viewing. This is what it's all about. It's not about me, it's not about President Clinton. It's about the process. It's about selecting the President of the United States. So we have our differences. We should have our differences. Mention other parties, they have their differences. We all agreed it's a pretty dull place. We should have more debate, and we'll have another debate on the economy. But I would just say this. This is the highest honor that I've ever had in my life, to think that somebody from Russell, Kansas, somebody who grew up living in a basement apartment, somebody whose parents didn't finish high school, somebody who spent about 39 months in hospitals after World War II, somebody who uses a button hook every day to get dressed, somebody who understands that the real Americans out there with real problems, whether they're soccer moms or the single parents or families working with seniors or people with disabilities, sort of may be. But there's some very fundamental differences in this campaign. President Clinton opposes term limits. President Clinton opposes constitutional amendments to balance the budget. President Clinton opposes voluntary prayer amendment. He opposes amendments to protect the flag of the United States of America. People give their lives. A couple of servicemen here, they sacrifice. They give everything for America. We ought to protect the American flag with a constitutional amendment. But beyond that, we need to address the economy. And I would just say, my time running out here, it's a very proud moment for me. And what I want the voters to do is to make a decision. And I want them to be proud of their vote in the years ahead. Proud that they voted for the right candidate. Proud that they voted, hopefully, for me.
He has to do that early on.
And I'll just make you one promise. My word is good. Democrats and Republicans have worked that Bob Dole's word is good. I keep my word. I promise you the economy's going to get better. We're going to have a good economic package. We're going into the next century a better America. Thank you.
Now, viewers of last night's debate thought Mr. Clinton won by an even more decisive margin, by 30 points. So why did Clinton win so decisively? The president's message was, look at the record.
We need a good, strong economic package, but the private sector creates a job, and they can do it.
If you believe that the California economy is better in 1992 than it is today,
I have a voiceover right
you
after
should vote
this.
for Bob Dole.
There's only about one
Bob Dole's message was, if you think you can trust this guy, then vote for him.
Now, the president doesn't have any ideas. He's out crashing ours. This isn't going to blow a hole in the deficit. He promised you a tax cut in 1992. And if you got one, then you ought to vote for him.
Clinton won on his performance as president, and our polling shows in the debate. Now, voters still have doubts about his character, but they do not have many doubts about President Clinton's abilities as a problem solver. President Clinton's message is,
I solved the problem that I was elected to solve, the economy. And if you re-elect me, I'll solve more problems. So far, for most voters, President Clinton's character has not become a major problem.
So what happens in the campaign now?
Well, the overwhelming majority of voters, including half of those now voting for Dole, believe President Clinton is going to win. Now the contest will shift to the House of Representatives, round zero of the Republican revolution. Our polls taken over the weekend shows a 10-point lead for the Democrats nationwide. If Dole loses, he doesn't want to bring down the Republican Congress with him. It's his Congress, too, and his reputation. It would be terrible for Dole to end up in the history books as the man who ended the Reagan Revolution.
Dole's overall debate performances were sound. He missed obvious chances to criticize Clinton directly on perceived or real scandals in the first debate. Dole worked well with questioners in the give and take of the town hall debate. However, to make critical evaluations of Clinton, he should have looked directly at the president and established eye contact. Looking away does not reinforce negative points as well. In the end, Bob Dole did his best in the 1996 presidential debates. His misfortune was to be up against an opponent who, especially in the town hall format, proved to be exceptionally quick on his feet. President Clinton's debate coach, former Senate Majority Leader George Mitchell of Maine, deserves particular credit for keeping Clinton's demeanor in check, calm and bipartisan in tone.
Because what Clinton is doing basically is running as a moderate Republican. And if you would like a copy of that video, I'll give you some of my business cards afterwards and send me a tape. I'll be happy to do it.
Okay. Gary?
Okay, thanks. I think one of the things that came up again and again in the reading that I did in looking at alternative candidates and the possible differences if there had been an alternative candidate in the debates is that presidential politics are not about policies, they're about personalities. And I'm not sure that that would have been reinforced in all cases. If you think about what would have happened had there been an alternative candidate, there's no general answer, rather it's specific to which alternative candidate it would have been. A lot of that literature talked early on in 95 especially talked about the possibility of Colin Powell as a candidate either for, they're still talking about bandying about for one of the major parties or as the candidate of Perot's new third party. Had it been Colin Powell, it could have been an entirely different kind of debate because he would have both personality and policy that he could talk about. He could probably bandy numbers back and forth with Clinton with equal verve and acumen. And he could also have the very presidential sort of personality that was why people wanted Colin Powell to run. Had Ross Perot been in it, a lot of people argue that the reason Perot was beneficial, thank you for the audio aid, that the reason Perot would be beneficial would be because he would bring a focus on the issues. I thought the best analysis in all of Jim's videotape was by the woman who said they didn't talk about issues, they talked about details. And Perot would in fact have distracted even from the details because one of the problems I think that Bob Dole had that was shown in Jim's video is that he is like Perot in this. He talks in buzzwords, also like George Bush. Remember the Dana Carvey George Bush, which everybody remembers better than they remember the real George Bush because it was prudent and bad and all of that. And Dole does a lot of that as well. He talks in these little soundbite splices of terms. When he said it's public ethics, not private ethics, he was responding to the polls that were saying people don't trust Clinton's character, yet they separate for him, as they have not always done for all politicians, private character from public character. They say, we don't really trust him, we don't think he has a good character, but we don't see it influencing his job performance because we don't think it's his public character that's a problem. His public character, represented by his persona in these debates, is very strong. Perot would have made it even more buzzwordy-ish because if you remember his performance in 92, the phrase that rings in my mind most often is, we're going to get those tassel loafer lobbyists right out of there. We're just going to throw them out. We're going to toss them out. And as Bob and I were discussing earlier today, you hear that sucking sound? That's your job moving to Mexico. And that was kind of his approach. It wasn't issues again. It wasn't even details. It was a bunch of buzzwords thrown together with a lot of hype and verve and kind of a chihuahua approach to debate. And so I think had it been Perot, it would have just been even more distracting. It would have made Dole look even worse because not only would he have Perot sharing buzzwords as Dole did, but Perot would be a more dynamic buzzword sharer than Dole was. And so it would have made Dole look even worse. Had it been one of the other, maybe a Ralph Nader, we might have actually gotten some discussion of policy issues, some real concern for things that might affect the future directly, rather than a recounting of Clinton's record, either good or ill, a recounting of Dole's decisions about Medicare, et cetera, et cetera. It maybe would have actually been a focus on some policies and some issues. I think two things I want to conclude with, and they refer to what Jim said and what Bob said, and that is that the two terms, I think, are immediacy and antagonism. And there's a way to handle antagonism rhetorically, non-verbally, that Jim was trying to lay out for us, or laid out for us really rather well, about go at the person not only verbally, but non-verbally, not, sort of physically intimidate, but rather make eye contact, look at Clinton when he attacks Clinton. And on the other hand is the concept of immediacy, the opposite of that. And why is Clinton so successful? It's because he's immediate with an audience. He creates this sense of a unity, a rapport between himself and, he walks right to the speaker, the questioner. He makes eye contact with the questioner. He looks at the camera. He looks at Senator Dole while he's speaking. He makes notes about the things that Senator Dole says. When he addresses a response, he looks right at Senator Dole as he makes that response. And so I think those nonverbal elements, the paper that Bob gave us, I think the nonverbal elements play a big role. I think what would have happened had there been alternative candidates depends on which alternative candidates it had been. The only one who really pursued it actively was Perot, to the point of taking it to court and everything, and was seen kind of in the public imagination. Also, I think the Libertarian candidate sort of sued in court, but Perot still had this sort of 92 afterglow that was caught up in some public imagination. But I don't think that Perot would have drastically changed the debates, and I think it would have in fact been more buzzwordy-ish, would have made it even better for Clinton than it was. And the only way to get real change in the debates would have been to maybe have a candidate who really represented a set of issues, for example, Ralph Nader, to be that alternative candidate, or to have had Colin Powell step in, and that could have totally changed the dynamic, because it would have been a genuine three-way kind of process where people were really trying to sort out who is my candidate. Because of Powell's popularity coming in, it would also have forced the two major party candidates to go on the attack a little bit and find some ways and some chinks maybe in Powell's armor, without attacking him personally, without ad hominems. They would have to have found ways to attack his fitness for the presidency, perhaps in terms of experience, knowledge of domestic policy, economic awareness, whatever. They would have had to have found some ways, and that would have changed even the preparation that both Bob and Jim talked about, because they would have had to look at some different issues in preparing for the debate. Thank you. Thanks. You guys were a great audience.
Technically, we have 5 minutes left if you'd like
Yeah,
to
if you have any
questions or anything else we got. Nice.
Thanks for being here.
I did want to say one thing about the non-traditional candidates that Gary was discussing. You may recall that after each of the presidential debates, Ross Perot and Larry King, they seem to be attached at the hip during the 92 and 96 campaigns, he would have his own forum on CNN. But it was always interesting because CNN did host at least one debate of which I'm aware for the non-traditional candidates, John Hagelin and Harry Brown and Ralph Nader. In fact, when Haley Barbour talked about one of the candidates, I think it's John Hagelin, he would not call him Natural Law, he would say the Maharishi candidate. So it was really interesting to watch those, because Perot would just get off on these rants, and Larry, oftentimes, he's a skilled interviewer, but he wouldn't necessarily call him. And you said details, and of course that's what is always said by Perot, the devil's in the details, of which he rarely gives.
Yeah, and I also think that's interesting that he would do his part of the debate on Larry King Live, because that really supports what I'm arguing, is that Perot is good theater, not good debate.
And it's because Larry King will not push him. In the 92 campaign, when Perot really was serious about being president for the first time, he went on Meet the Press, and Tim Russert cleaned his clock, because he asked him for specifics, not in a mean or a nasty way, but okay, well, how are you going to do this? And he would say something. Help me. Perot would say, Perot would say something like, well, we'll get those to you later.
Ed Rollins explained that Ross Perot, in the time he worked with him during the 92 campaign, and by the way, I think I said Clinton was governor 90 and 92. I meant 80 and 82, and I want to correct myself. The big issue is that did Perot want to spend the kind of resources and money in 96 he did in 92? And the fact that he flamed out in 92, fired all his professional staff and said, I'm just going to campaign my way. I'm going to do it my way. You're not going to tell me what to do. I'll just go on Larry King. I don't need to pay for TV ads. And the fact that he took federal matching campaign money really tells you that Perot really liked the idea of running for president a lot more than he ever really wanted to be president. And many of his supporters were extremely angry with him when they had the convention for his party. And really it turned into a dog and pony show because Perot had kind of promised he wouldn't be the candidate. And then as the convention neared, and help me out, who was the other guy, Governor
Dick
Doom.
Lamb.
Dick Lamb, right. Governor Doom, he said we have a duty to die when he was governor, referring to senior citizens. Dick Lamb was his only opponent, and he felt compelled to take the reins of the party back and run again. And again, he had a fairly mediocre choice as a VP. It was almost a recycle. The only difference between 92 and 96. Yeah.
He's well known.
Yeah, he's a very educated man and very, very capable. But in terms of political credibility, again, he didn't pick somebody with political credibility. Certainly better than Admiral Stockdale, but poor Admiral Stockdale just got sucked in because they missed the date. Oh, yeah.
Very well known.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I think if you, Jim mentioned the example of what happened when he went on Meet the Press versus Larry King, and then I also hearken back to when he tried to debate with Al Gore, who no one would put in the same camp with Clinton, I don't think, as a stylist, as a creator of immediacy, and yet he made Perot look horrible. Really, really beat him badly in that debate, which was a more debate-like debate. It was almost more like the kind of debate we would actually do, except we don't usually have charts and graphs.
And one final point. Gary was talking about Perot. Can you imagine how the atmospherics of the 96 presidential debates would have changed had Perot been in? I mean, when you think about it from an historical perspective, it's rather remarkable considering the fact he really ran only a month-and-a-half campaign that he got 19% of the popular vote in 92. A large measure of that came not only from the fact that he financed his own campaign, but that he was perceived as doing really well in 2 out of the 3 presidential debates. Ironically, the town hall format in which he looked like a 3-year-old sitting in those high chairs during the debates in Richmond did not serve him well. But of course, Dole didn't want him in because he might take away some conservative support, and Clinton, figuring he's going to win anyway, would ideally like to get over that magic number of 50%, even though those scandals near the end of or alleged scandals near the end of the campaign appear to have dropped him down to 49. So.
Well, thank you all for coming.
Thanks a lot.
Go to dinner, do what you're going to do. Thanks for coming.
Accept.
And if we hadn't come, what would you have done?